From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
We all have an idea of what love can be.
I want to see you again.
Now you see me.
You know what I mean.
That's a trailer for Hollywood's latest blockbuster. But before it even reached the cinemas, rumours had started swirling that all was not well between its stars.
But 15 seconds. That's all it takes to completely change everything.
The new It Ends With Us feud rumors. Is there some kind of rift between the cast and Justin Baldoni?
Tonight, scandal rocking Hollywood.
Justin hit the carpet with his wife, but didn't pose with his co-stars.
With so much attention, Blake Lively has been put in the hot seat on social media.
Since then, things have escalated. Now, the two Hollywood stars are locked in an all-out war.
We're going to be talking all things Blake Lively and her legal complaint that she's filed against her It Ends With Us co-star, Justin Baldoni.
Justin Baldoni sues the New York Times for $250 million over the outlet's Blake Lively harassment story.
Are you going to sue Blake Lively too?
Into oblivion. Wait till you see this lawsuit.
Oh boy.
The battle between the two has left a wreckage of claims and counterclaims in their wake. With multiple lawsuits now flying around, what do we actually know? What do court documents and private texts reveal about Hollywood's darker arts? And, like MeToo, could this be the start of another watershed moment triggered by Tinseltown? The story today, Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni.
I am Keiran Southern. I'm the West Coast correspondent for The Times, and I cover Hollywood, and I'm based in LA.
Keiran, as we're gearing up for awards season, it feels like all of Hollywood is abuzz about one story. When did you first hear about it?
I first heard about it over Christmas when the New York Times reported that Blake Lively had filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department alleging sexual harassment and the orchestration of a smear campaign by Justin Baldoni and his production company, Wayfarer. It wasn't a lawsuit at that time, it was a complaint.
Tell us a bit about the two Hollywood characters at the centre of it all, though. Tell us about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni.
Yeah, I think everyone will have heard of Blake Lively. She's an A-list actress and she's part of a Hollywood power couple. Her husband is Ryan Reynolds, the superhero actor, producer, businessman.
Owner of a Welsh football team.
Indeed, indeed. She's also part owner of Wrexham. She rose to fame in Gossip Girl, the early 2000s television show. She's close friends with Taylor Swift, so she's often in People magazine and stuff with Taylor Swift. They're good friends with Hugh Jackman. She's been invited to state dinners at the White House. Basically, Blake Lively is a big player in Hollywood. Justin Baldoni is definitely not in the same league. He was known for starring in Jane the Virgin,
the TV series. And the stage for all of this, the place where they've come to blows, effectively, or legal blows at least, is on the set of their last film. Tell us a bit about that.
It Ends With Us is a sort of romantic drama that was based on a best-selling Colleen Hoover book. Baldoni was the director of the movie as well as the star alongside Lively. He played a charming but abusive boyfriend. All seemed well, you know, that the film, early impressions were good. But then rumours beginning to surface as the film was about to be released, that they clashed on set, disagreements over how the film should look, creative differences, which, to be honest, isn't unheard of in Hollywood. But there was hints of something a bit more serious even among those rumours. There were suggestions Baldoni had wanted to find out how much Lively had weighed.
A source tells us Justin, who has a history of back problems, asked his trainer how much Blake weighed so he could train to prevent injury during a scene where he lifts her up. Blake apparently found out and took offense. Justin claims it was simply a tactical question with no ill intent.
And then the film comes out and there's a really odd publicity tour. They're not doing interviews together, Baldoni and Lively, which is very odd, the two romantic leads in a film like this. At the New York premiere in August, they're not pictured together, basically confirms that something's gone on here. There was reports that Lively's team were telling reporters, don't ask questions about Justin. And then even the sort of the tone of the publicity around the film was making headlines. This is a story about domestic violence, and yet the publicity was quite soft. There was lots of flowers, pink carpet, it was all quite light-hearted. Critics started saying it was tone deaf, but then you started to notice criticism of Lively. She was criticised for comments in a promotional video.
Hello, Blake Lively here, and It Ends With Us is in theaters now, so grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
Critics were saying this is a serious story about domestic violence, and that's not how it's being sold.
And she was getting criticism for the tone of some of the promotion around it, but Justin Baldoni was actually getting praised around then.
Yeah, he, for years, had billed himself as a feminist and an ally, and during the promotional tour for the film, he was focusing on stories of domestic violence survivors, and yeah, that's what he was getting praised for a sort of careful handling of the movie.
I think all of the scenes showcasing gender-based violence, I think that was very hard for me. There are too many people that have to deal with that every single day. But luckily, I had an incredible intimacy coordinator. I had an incredible stunt coordinator. Both of them were women. It was those women that were in charge. And from the beginning, I wanted all the intimate scenes to be from a female gaze.
So he's talking about the very serious issues it covers. She's being made out to talk about much lighter stuff. How serious did the criticism of her become?
It did start to get quite serious on social media and in legacy media. The treatment of Lively has since been described as major character assassination. Huge number of negative articles about Blake Lively in the press, The Guardian, the Daily Mail, even the Times. There was a headline in the Daily Mail, is Blake Lively set to be cancelled? The Sun said Blake Lively slammed as a mean girl. And then she was criticised all over social media by women who were saying they were domestic violence victims and survivors.
This message is for Blake Lively. I am a domestic violence survivor. My heart honestly just broke for the entire survivor community because in this movie, you represented us. And you have the audacity to show up to the premiere and have influencers promote it like it's the sequel to Barbie.
And then people started sort of digging up old clips and old stories, trying to make out that Blake Lively was a bad person. Now, this was so odd and jarring because Blake Lively had been so loved. She was a huge star. She'd never been through anything like this before.
So having made a film about domestic violence, just through the course of the promotional tour, the publicity for this film coming out, Blake Lively is starting to get so much criticism, people are talking about her being cancelled. At what point did all of that reach a boiling point?
Baldoni hired a crisis PR manager called Melissa Nathan. That name will be familiar to anyone who closely followed the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard defamation case from a few years ago. Johnny Depp hired Melissa Nathan back then. But it all seemed to go quiet after the film's release. The film came out in August. It was a huge box office success. In ordinary circumstances, this film would be guaranteed a sequel, if not a full franchise. It's done really well.
Wow.
But the fact that there was no mention of a sequel was, confirmation as if we needed it, as though all was not well behind the scenes. And then just before Christmas in December, Lively filed that complaint in California, alleging Baldoni had orchestrated a smear campaign to destroy her reputation and alleging sexual harassment. And then there was a lawsuit filed by Baldoni against the New York Times, which had yet more sort of extraordinary claims in it. And then as if the case wasn't complicated enough, Blake Lively then filed an official lawsuit against Justin Baldoni. And again, that sort of ratcheted up the feud even further.
That brings us back to when the filming was actually taking place. What does she allege happened on set?
Lively's lawyers say inappropriate and unwelcome behaviour was happening on set, and that Baldoni and Jamie Heath were the perpetrators. Heath is the CEO of Baldoni's Wayfarer company that produced the film. She alleges that Justin Baldoni made inappropriate comments. He instituted unwanted kissing during filming. He made sexual comments to Lively. He allegedly walked into her trailer when she was breastfeeding without warning. He claimed that he had had conversations with the dead, including with Blake Lively's father. So in January of 2024, Lively called a meeting at her home in Tribeca to discuss this behaviour. Ryan Reynolds is said to have been there, members of the production team, and it said that Baldoni agreed to, I think it was 30 rules about alleged bad behaviour on the set that would stop and so filming could continue. They included Baldoni and his production partner not being able to discuss a pornography addiction in front of Blake Lively or other crew members.
So Baldoni is addicted to porn?
Apparently so. That's what he's spoken about in the past. There was a ban on showing nude videos or images of women to Lively. That was a big headline when it came out in the lawsuit, but Baldoni's team later said that was a reference to Baldoni showing Lively a video of his wife giving birth in what he thought was a moment of bonding between the two. Another of the agreements was not to add any more sex scenes or oral sex or having Blake Lively appear in sexual scenes outside of the scope of the script that Blake Lively had approved when signing on to the project, and no one was allowed to enter Blake Lively's trailer while she was in a state of undress. And I think that's a reference to the allegation that people had walked on her when she was breastfeeding. But in response to the allegation that he walked into Blake Lively's trailer while she was breastfeeding, Baldoni said that he and Lively were exchanging text messages. She was signing off with an X, obviously the sort of universal symbol for a kiss. That suggests a certain informality between the two. And then another text, Lively is said to have said, "I'm just pumping in my trailer if you want to work out our lines." To which Baldoni responded, "Copy, eating with crew, and we'll head that way." So his argument is sort of that's far less sinister than how the initial allegation was reported in the New York Times.
That deals with the harassment that she said took place on set. Part of her complaint, though, also talks about this attempt to smear her reputation. What does she allege was happening there?
She's alleging that Baldoni and his PR team orchestrated a social media campaign, basically a dark art campaign, to make Blake Lively look bad and destroy her reputation and ensure that if anything publicly came out about the dispute between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively, she would be viewed as the villain. Blake Lively said this had a material impact on her career and reputation. She said she had to pull out of hosting Saturday Night Live. She said maybe studios would think twice before giving her a job because of this smear campaign. Now it's important to have Baldoni and his publicist have completely denied this, and they've said any sort of bad comments that were made about Lively were organic and sort of sprung up on their own on social media.
And Keiran, I know you've spent a lot of Christmas having to wade through all the court documents around this. What did they tell us? I mean, how much evidence is there for these claims?
A lot of text messages are included between publicists working for Justin Baldoni. Now, it's also important to add that Justin Baldoni sued the New York Times, and he says a lot of these messages and a lot of the evidence was taken out of context to make him and his publicity team look bad. So we will have to wait for this legal action to be thrashed out in the court before we can say definitively what happened. But a lot of interesting details. You know, he was quoted a PR package of $175,000 I think it was, for 3 or 4 month periods, including full Reddit, full social account takedowns. Melissa Nathan, his crisis PR manager, told a colleague, the majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them. Laugh out loud, she said. And one of Melissa Nathan's colleagues says, it's actually sad because it just shows you have people who really want to hate on women. And then infamously, Melissa Nathan was quoted as saying, "We can bury anyone."
Blake Lively was criticised over the way the marketing around the film, the publicity had taken place. People said it was too light-hearted and she had joined in with that. What does the court filing say about that?
Lively claims that the film's marketing plan expressly required her and the rest of the cast to focus on her character's strength and resilience as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence.
So they wanted it to be a more positive spin.
Exactly. The marketing strategy called for it to be quite soft, quite light, not a focus on the darker aspects of the film. But Lively's filing appears to show that Baldoni sort of abruptly veered away from the planned PR approach and told his PR company to focus on finding the most emotional and touching content from survivors supporting this film and reposting. He's alleged to have said, "Need you to be finding survivors, sharing their stories and amplifying them on my page and TikTok." Now, Lively's legal complaint claims that Baldoni, and I quote, used domestic violence survivor content to protect his public image after the sexual harassment allegations came out. So essentially, she's attempting to argue that he in effect weaponized those stories of domestic violence to protect himself.
Keiran, you've mentioned a bit about Justin Baldoni's response to all of this. Just tell us more about his line.
He has completely denied Blake Lively's claims. He has accused Lively of the cynical abuse of sexual harassment allegations to further her brazen and calculated aim of expropriating the film. His lawyer, Brian Friedman, who's a high-profile Hollywood lawyer, Rottweiler type, he's also said that Baldoni will sue Lively, as if the case wasn't complicated enough. Friedman's also claimed that Lively hired a PR team to plant negative and completely fabricated stories about Wayfarer Studios, that's Baldoni's company, but she's also denied that. Baldoni's lawyers accused Blake Lively of making her numerous demands and threats, including threatening not to show up to set, threatening not to promote the film, which would end up ultimately leading to the demise of the film during its release if her demands were not met.
My name's Andrew Billen. I'm a feature writer on The Times.
Andrew, everyone is now talking about Justin Baldoni, but he's a man you've been tracking for much longer. You actually met him back in 2021. Tell us about that.
Well, it was sort of COVID-y time, so I met him actually on Zoom, as I tended to do. So I was at my home in Oxford, and he was at his home in California, in a very ecologically sound small town called Ojai.
And what were your first impressions of him?
Well, I had almost struggled through his book called Man Enough that had just been published. And
Manly of you.
It was very manly of me to go through the entire book and read about this man's problems with basically being a man. And he didn't disappoint. In fact, he was probably even more complicated and troubled by his sex than I had imagined from reading the book.
Tell us about that, and in what way?
The man is basically horribly divided between the man he thinks he should be and the man he always has been. He believes he should be a new man. He thinks he should be a feminist who respects women for their brains and what's in their hearts, and not to be the sort of man who assumes that men are more intelligent than women or that women's main value is the way they look. And on the other side, there is the Justin Baldoni who is absolutely struck by the importance of being a man. Somebody who is enthralled, I would say, to his sex drive, who, although being a feminist, still uses porn, big part of his life still, at least when I talked to him a few years ago. And he knows there's a contradiction, because on the one hand, he goes out in public and tells other men how they should think about women and the kind of new men they should be. Like he goes home, turns on his computer, and he's pulled to the pornography that he's been looking at since he was 11.
Wow. I mean, you're right. There really is a massive contradictions there. He wrote about it in the book that you read. He's also tackled it in public before. He's talked about this a lot. He did a TED Talk, for example. Tell us about that.
The TED Talk, in retrospect, is extraordinary because he is really lecturing all of us, by which I mean all of us men, on how to be men and how we should think about women.
Over the course of my career, I've had the great honor playing some of the greatest male role models ever represented on television. Now, these roles don't represent the kind of man I am in my real life.
And he calls upon us to be allies and also to be interventionist.
Are you strong enough to be sensitive? Are you confident enough to listen to the women in your life, to hear their ideas and their solutions, to hold their anguish and actually believe them?
So if you hear your son objectifying women, talking about them having a nice ass or something like that, the real man, he says, will intervene.
And will you be man enough to stand up to other men when you hear locker room talk? When you hear stories of sexual harassment, when you hear your boys talking about grabbing ass or getting her drunk, will you actually stand up and do something so that one day we don't have to live in a world where a woman has to risk everything and come forward to say the words, "Me too"?
We can be better men, he says, between the lines. You can be better men if you're more like Justin Baldoni.
Fellas, we are the problem. The glass ceiling exists because we put it there. And if we want to be a part of the solution, then words are no longer enough.
Wow. Tell us a bit about this man who set himself up as a paragon, really. What's his background? Where did he come from? Where was he brought up? How does he end up in Hollywood?
Well, he's American. He was born in California. His mother is Jewish. His father, I think, came from a family that was based in Central Europe. He then moved when he was quite young to Oregon, a much more blue-collar, working class, as we would say, town. That involved, of course, moving school, and he was bullied at school. And I think he probably felt he wasn't quite manly enough because he was, in British terms, a bit too posh.
Aha. Is he Baha'i as a religion?
The family faith is Baha'i, which I'll be completely frank, I had never heard of. It's a 19th century faith invented in Persia. And it's, I mean, you could say that all faiths have their weird aspects. But the relevant one here, I think, is that it's pretty screwed up on sexuality. And it says, in a much more strident way than I think modern Christian churches would say, it says you shouldn't have sex outside marriage. And this caused him problems with his huge sex drive as a teenager. And it's a bizarre passage in his book where he blames a girlfriend for inserting his penis into her while they were fooling around. And he says this was deeply scarring to him because it was a betrayal of what he believed in his faith.
And it does sound like he's clearly very honest in this book with a lot of things that you'd think would raise eyebrows. He also seems quite obsessed with his physique.
Yes, and one of the things he's honest about is how he admires his own body. In fact, when he begins courting the woman who would become his wife, Emily, another actress, he is absolutely shocked that she isn't bowled over by his fantastic body and his pretty ass. And he spends an awful lot of time working out and making sure that his pectoral muscles are in the best possible shape.
3 years after you interviewed him and found this massive contradictions, this very complicated man, the film It Ends With Us comes out. Have you seen it? And what did you think of it?
I did see the film. It's a deeply flawed film. It's a film that really doesn't work, in my opinion, because it deals with a very serious subject of violent domestic abuse, but it does it as a kind of rom-com, which I think, rather unsatisfactorily, ends with letting the violent man, played by Baldoni, off the hook.
And when you heard about the fallout, when you realised just how bad things had got off-screen, what did you think? Were you surprised?
How could I be surprised when I'd found him such a conflicted man? A man who was performative, I felt, in his defence of women, and was still also very strongly pulled towards the worst kind of man. I think he's a hypocrite.
Just finally, when you interviewed him back in 2021, at the time, Britain had been rocked by the case of Sarah Everard. She'd been abducted, raped and murdered by a policeman. The whole country was in shock, and it's something he talked about in the interview.
Yes, he'd certainly followed what was happening in Britain, and he was rather sort of strangely annoyed that there'd been this hashtag on social media, not all men, which was men saying, we're not all murderous rapists. And he said on a TikTok video, men, shut up.
Why is this so hard to understand? If women feel unsafe, then just listen. I know so many women who have to do crazy things just to feel safe to walk to their car at night. Men have to do nothing like that to feel safe. So instead of saying not all men, we should say too many women.
He said, men, sit in your discomfort and shut up, which is weird because that's the one thing. Shutting up is the one thing that Justin Baldoni is not good at.
Keiran, how does this end and how long might it go on for?
The vast majority of civil cases get settled out of court. It's very expensive to continue these cases. It can be very damaging public relations-wise. Financially, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds could do this for the next 100 years and not feel it. I'm less certain Justin Baldoni could. But there's already been a lot of damaging material on both sides that's come out here. There will be even more damaging material if these cases continue. If I was a betting man, I would say that this will probably rumble on maybe into the summer before cooler heads do prevail and it is settled with a hefty round of non-disclosure agreements. But I do think Justin Baldoni has been seriously damaged by this. He built himself for years as a feminist and as an ally, and I think mud sticks.
What does this case tell us about how women in Hollywood are treated, how they're viewed, and whether they're believed when they talk about things that have happened?
We are in a post-MeToo world in Hollywood, and we can all remember the horrific stories that came out in late 2017, and there was a feeling for a while that this can never happen again. And yet, Blake Lively is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. And if a legal complaint is to be believed, she was being sexually harassed on set. Her rights were being trampled over. At the same time, it shows that progress has been made since Me Too, and that now women are being believed when they make these allegations. So there was a sort of feminist group that rescinded an award for Justin Baldoni. And I think it's clear that Blake Lively is winning this in the court of public opinion, and yet it's still happening even to the biggest stars.
Last week, Blake Lively's lawyers released their latest statement saying, Miss Lively's litigation involves serious crimes of sexual harassment and retaliation backed by concrete facts. This is not a feud arising from creative differences or a he said, she said situation. As alleged in Miss Lively's complaint, and as we will prove in litigation, Wayfarer and its associates engaged in unlawful, retaliatory astroturfing against Ms. Lively for simply trying to protect herself and others on a film set. And astroturfing, if that's a term you haven't come across, is where, like the fake grass effect of astroturf, you create a deliberate campaign and make it look like it's coming from ordinary people, from the grassroots of society. And over in the other corner, my colleague Keiran Southern contacted Justin Baldoni and his PR woman Melissa Nathan and Johnny Depp for comment, but he's had no response. You've been listening to me, Manveen Rana, with my guests Keiran Southern, West Coast correspondent, and Andrew Billen, features writer at The Times. Today's producer was Olivia Case. The executive producer was Fiona Leach. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Assetto. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We do read them all. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.